David Katz, everybody. Welcome to the show, David Katz.
Hi, great to be with you, Kim.
Hi. Great to be with you as well. So
Shout
Mark
out to
wanted,
Mark's mom. Shout out to
yeah,
Mark's mom and safe travels back, Mark.
it's nice to see that he's able to go visit and spend time. He wanted me to ask you, and I know you were talking about last night when we were emailing back and forth, P. Diddy or Sean Diddy Combs, who is charged with some pretty heinous crimes, and possibly because of the nature of them, he's not allowed to leave. Maybe because he has a lot of money and maybe a flight risk. I don't know what the reason is, but they're keeping him locked up.
Well, I was a federal prosecutor, so I get the idea of bringing these cases and I get the idea of bringing them under racketeering. I do want to present what I consider both sides of the story on some of these questions, particularly bearing in mind that we do have a presumption of innocence and that unpopular people are protected from being dragged into court and punished for things because they're very unpopular at the moment that they're charged because of due process, because of all the protections that we have. And, just to take an example, Miranda wasn't exactly a saint, but he gave us the Miranda warnings. And so sometimes case law and our constitutional rights really, that's where the rubber hits the road. And those rights protect all of us, but they get made in cases like P. Diddy's, like in Miranda's, like in some other case. There was a famous Katz who made good law for our civil rights, not related to him at all. And he was a bookie. He used a phone booth, and he had a major case in Fourth Amendment law that protects all of our privacy. So I think it's important to recognize, and we've had these racketeering charges before. Basically, he's charged in 3 counts by a federal grand jury. You hear everything in the world. I heard one of the people who's bringing a civil suit trying to get millions of dollars from Diddy for her client say that, the grand jury looked at this very carefully and the grand jury decided on these 3 charges. Please. I mean, the grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. All the people who said it was a big deal that Trump got indicted by a grand jury, and the ones who say it's a big deal that Diddy got indicted by a grand jury, and they looked at this so carefully. Let me disabuse any of your viewers who believe that. The prosecutors go in there. There's no exculpatory evidence that has to be presented. The Supreme Court has ruled there's no defense side of the story. If the defendant wants to tell his story, he has or she has to do it by him or herself with the lawyer waiting outside the grand jury room. And so they basically do. That expression, they'll indict a ham sandwich, is because it's one-sided. There are really no checks and balances on it except the good faith of the prosecutor. The reason that you, me, and everybody's not indicted in this country is the good faith of the prosecutors, not because the grand jury will really hear our side of the story or consider our side of the story before they indict you, me, and anyone else who's watching. Now, we do have a lot of good faith among the prosecutors. I was one. I never indicted anybody. I had the slightest question in my mind that they were guilty, and I tried to look at both sides of it. But I'm saying that law doesn't require that, and I don't think they really looked perhaps at the other side of the Diddy charges. Now, turning to the charges, he's charged in, I say, 3 counts. And it was an interesting decision. I don't mean to attack, other lawyers' judgment. This was a very tough judgment call, and everything is clear in hindsight, right? But I wonder if it would have been better if he had imposed these home detention conditions, confinement conditions on himself. He knew this charge was coming. There were 2 spectacular raids, you'll remember. One was the one that was supposedly a militaristic. I mean, you can't blame them. They're expecting to find weapons. He's a very rich person. He has a compound. You and I would go in there with flak jackets and everything else and with a little tank because we wouldn't want to get shot. We don't want to have to tell our family, hey, we didn't come home tonight, or have someone tell our family we didn't come home tonight. So that's why the police and the federal agents go in like that. And when people say, oh, they militarized it, I don't buy that. But they did a big raid here in LA. They did another big raid of his mansion that for $48 million mansion in Miami. And when they raided them, they found guns and things like that. The point is that P. Diddy and his lawyers, very expensive lawyers, one of the hugest firms in Los Angeles. If you have the money, it's amazing who you can hire. I think you should always hire a smaller firm like mine, special pleading for smaller criminal defense firms.
And I wouldn't hire anybody but you. Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes. And that one is huge mega firms. I just think that these mega firms, when they have somebody like the Pharma Bro, or they have somebody like P. Diddy, And all of your other clients have the same reaction that the public has. A lot of your viewers and listeners are probably thinking, why is David Katz saying anything that helps this P. Diddy? I saw that tape, which, by the way, is over 8 years old. I saw that very annoying, more than annoying, that outrageous, brutal tape of him beating that woman in that hotel corridor. I'm ready to convict the guy right now. Why is Katz saying anything on his behalf at all? But what I'm saying on this particular issue, Kim, is that maybe they should have had him stay in Miami at the compound, hire the guards, have the guards impose the conditions that they said, because they knew this indictment was coming. So my point was to have him go to New York City, to frolic around New York City, and then say, look, I'm ready to post the 48 million. It would have been better, I think, in retrospect. And again, it's different lawyers would handle it different ways. And maybe they told Diddy exactly this, and Diddy wouldn't follow their advice. But he would have gotten a couple of things if he'd have stuck around in the mansion and imposed those conditions on himself. He could have said they really worked. He didn't have a computer. He didn't have a phone. He didn't tamper with anybody. Because and then they could have presented that to the judge. And the other interesting aspect of it is that then he would have had to be taken to the nearest magistrate judge, which means he would have been taken to a magistrate judge in Miami, Florida, where he might have had a better chance of getting released. And if a magistrate judge in Florida had released him and the district judge had allowed him to go with security on a plane, it makes it harder for the New York judge, doesn't it, to then detain him and put him in that hellhole of a prison where he is, the Brooklyn House of Detention over there, the Brooklyn Metropolitan.
I'm told that this is a bad place. Like, this is a place where it's kind of squalid and there's a lot of violence. Like, this is a bad scene.
I had a client there. It's called the Eastern District of New York, and he only spent a night or two there, and then I got him released on bail. But yes, it's a squalid, awful place. You might wonder why this country, with all of its wealth and the money that we spend on things, don't have decent federal detention facilities. But this one is particularly egregious, this one. It does have quite a blue ribbon or red carpet, to be sarcastic. It's had more famous people than a lot of, El Chapo, I think, was there at least for a while. The pharma bro that I mentioned was there. Epstein was not there. Epstein, as the cynics say, who was suicided. He was suicided at a jail in New York, which I've also visited for a client. Also not a nice place at all. But they closed that place down after Epstein committed suicide there. And the other thing I want to say about this prison where he's going to be held for detention, here's the main point that I wanted to make about due process. He has a right to defend himself, no matter what people think of him, no matter what their initial reaction is to the charge. He has a right to defend himself, and that's awfully hard to do. We claim there's a presumption of innocence. We claim that we believe that 10 guilty people should go free rather than one innocent person go to jail. And the way we give those principles, what we would say are values, the way that we really respect our values and what we believe about the dignity of people and the fairness of the system, is we give them a fair chance to go to trial. And he's so far behind the 8 ball, being kept, not just because it's an awful place, but he's notorious, he's famous. So as a practical matter, he's going to be in solitary confinement because they can't take the risk that some other prisoner attacks him or some problem like that happens. So he's in solitary confinement. In terms of meeting with his attorneys, it's so much worse than the conditions to meet with a client. I mean, I have a client right now, federal case, who's detained, and that alone is a problem. You have to go at certain hours. There's a count when you can't be there. You can't really set up shop, of course. You have to make sure your client has a computer and access to a computer. And all of those things that help you to prepare, he could do much better at his home. Now, people say, oh my God, you mean while he's waiting a trial, he gets to live in his mansion? Well, I mean, if you want to have class warfare all the time with our criminal justice system, I guess you can take a posture of just like class warfare. But there are people like Pharma Bro, like this guy, like some billionaire from China who got charged here and stayed in a fabulous place while he prepared for trial. There are some people who do get acquitted, there are some people who ought to be acquitted, but all of them ought to be allowed to put on their motions and to prepare and to put on their trial. And it just is such an impediment on his preparation for trial. And one more thing, that the discovery in these cases tends to be immense. this issue. If anyone's seen My Cousin Vinny, remember My
Yeah.
Cousin Vinny? There's something called discovery. Did you look at the file of the discovery? And you have this idea in mind that it's like an old phone. It's discovery. Well, discovery now is terabytes of information that you need to access with a computer. And you need to see the visual media, which can be, again, difficult and hard to do. So every reason in the world, and let me just go through them. Flight risk is a reason, okay? He's not fleeing anywhere. He'd have private guards that he would pay out of his pocket, not the taxpayers, but they would be sworn, they'd be like former marshals, former FBI agents. They are not going to let him, run away because he's paying their per diem. He would pay the per diem. They would be very efficient and very sworn and very make sure he does not leave that mansion any which way. All he basically does at the mansion is eat, sleep, and prepare for his trial in a way that's so much fairer to our values and our sense of due process than to keep him in that hellhole where it's so hard to visit him and where he's so restricted. Danger to the community and obstruction of justice. Those have been stated to be kind of the linchpins of why he's being held. And he did apparently very foolishly contact a witness or several witnesses multiple times. Well, it happened. He shouldn't have done it. Let's talk about what's going to happen going forward, because that's the question, whether he gets bail or whether he gets detained there or not. And there are ways. I have another client who's out on bail right now, but he's not allowed to use a computer. The computer can only be used to contact me and to contact medical people. And you can tell every email that he sends, it's either to me or it's to a medical person, or there's an inquiry about it. P. Diddy would also have a guest list. He'd only have like 3 people who are allowed to visit him. And if one of those people the government thought was a co-conspirator, they would fight and tell the judge, no, that person shouldn't be on the guest list of the people allowed to visit him. So you'd restrict his phone calls. People say, how do you do? He has a burner phone, he goes back to jail. He has a phone call that he can't explain to someone who's on the list of people he's approved to call. He goes right back to jail. But yes, he can, he can call his mom. He can maybe call his 3 kids. If they have a suspicion about the 3 kids, no, he can't call the 3 kids. I don't know if they have anything like that.
So why didn't the judge make this decision? Why keep him in jail then? I mean, and I have to say, I have a hard time feeling bad for P. Diddy. I know we're innocent until proven guilty, but it's like, I don't necessarily care that he has to spend a few nights or a month or something in jail, given everything that he's being charged with, which I know doesn't sound good. But why did the judge not do what you're saying?
Almost everyone believes in civil liberties until you get to somebody that they really don't like.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, for him, for Trump, for this Diddy guy. And we've all seen the beating. The beating, mind you, was over 8 years ago. People should get their heads around it's over 8 years ago. Think of all the people in America who have priors or who, as part of their case, his lawyer said he's got the really bad fortune that the worst thing he ever did in his life, P. Diddy, is on tape. I don't know if it's the worst thing he ever did, but people have done bad things. If people think there's over incarceration, if they think there's way too many people of color in prison, in the criminal justice system, a lot of them are in there for assault, battery, domestic violence, not just men, but women, right? And if you say, oh my God, I've seen that tape, this man should spend 20 years in prison. Well, just take the tape all by itself and say to yourself, okay, that's the 20-year-old guy who has the bad luck to be on a motel, device. He comes through, he's in a motel, and that's what's on the videotape. Okay. But he's not P. Diddy. He's some 20-year-old guy who's drunk. He's having an episode and he does exactly what he did. Or it's a woman, women beat men and beat other women too. You take all those people, what are there, hundreds of thousands of them in America who get prosecuted, people who've committed assault and battery, people who've committed domestic violence. He didn't knife her. What he did was terrible. He threw the vase. He did everything that we've seen. But if you think that he ought to get 20 years, then what do you think that the million of people in America with assault and battery, because they're not on tape? I mean, you can visualize that's what assault and battery is. Someone goes to the hospital, right? They've had a vase thrown at them. They've been hit. They have a bruise, 20 years. But that tape, of course, has a huge thing that everybody's considering. I want to say something else, too. He's charged in 3 counts, and the main one is racketeering. And we talked about this in Atlanta, these huge racketeering conspiracies. And I think someone should look at this racketeering law. They charge it in civil cases. I don't think usually racketeering laws add much to what's being charged, except it makes the person look bad. and you can call your civil opponent, or you can call P. Diddy, you're a racketeer, you're a racketeer. But this racketeering, according to the government, stopped 6 years ago. So the span of the racketeering conspiracy, which is what's driving this whole case, stopped in 2016. In other words, this man has not been, even by the government's accusations, a racketeer for over the last 6 years. The thing that he's done that they charge in the indictment is count 3, that he caused women and men to be cross state lines, not minors, adult women and men to cross state lines for the purpose of prostitution. That's the only thing that he's done in the last 6 years. That's count 3. You know, we had this issue in the pornography business, and they were going to try to prosecute people who made porno flicks because what did they do? They paid people sometimes to cross state lines to make these pornographic movies. Well, wasn't that prostitution? And then the adult industry got together, and it wasn't decided that that was not prostitution. But boy, I sure don't see a whole lot of difference from a moral point of view between paying people to come from Nevada to make a porn flick and have sex, and him having people come from Nevada to California to put on these performances for him. So I think there's a lot of things that the defense is going to say, and I think a lot of it is going to be completely, not held to be very important by the public, because they'll see that clip over and over and over again, and that clip is, of course, very disturbing.
No Contendo puts down a $10 super sticker and a question for Mr. Katz. He says many cases against famous people address them only by their stage name. Is that, and many state that this biases those cases. Is that applicable in this situation? Could that possibly be cause for a charge to be thrown out?
It's also insulting. I had a client in the Midwest. I got him acquitted, but he suffered the indignity of being indicted under the name Fat Boy. And of course, there's the ketamine queen. There's controversy now in the Matt Perry overdose death that one of the defendants has been called the ketamine queen. And her attorney has screamed about that. But the government's answer to that is that people who dealt with her and bought ketamine from her, they referred to her as the ketamine queen.
Right.
And so if it's a name that people used for you, the case is not going to be thrown out. The most remedy you could get is you could excise or have the judge redact the name. And, you know, young murder, if you know, it's ketamine queen's bad enough, but, you know, something that implies in your nickname that you did the crime, you know, if your nickname is Slit Throat and you're charged with slitting someone's throat, you would probably get that excise. You would get that excise. But the government argument is that when people say, I only knew the guy as Slit Throat, they don't want the defense attorney to say, you heard about some guy named Slit Throat. You haven't heard about my defendant. You haven't heard about my guy. Right. That was the confusion they were trying to. So if you referred that way if you referred to that way during the criminal acts, that should be allowed to come in so the jury doesn't get confused that there's two different people. The other dude did it, the Slit Throat, the guy that wasn't in the courtroom.
Another comment on the P. Diddy case with the lady Beatrice and a $5 super sticker. She says, I feel if P. Diddy is getting busted for his stuff, Trump should be busted for his. It's only fair. Both are rich, so no claiming that here. And it's interesting that she brings up Trump, because I had a question I wanted to ask you. It's something I've been thinking about. I had so many things to talk to you about, and our time is running short. But I wonder if there are two different scenarios come November after the election. In these cases pending against Trump, I know there's a difference between federal cases, which if he wins, he could wipe out. But the state cases, which we've seen in the New York hush money case, that the sentencing has now been delayed. And I wonder if he wins, does that affect the type of sentence he would get, how he's able to serve that sentence? If he loses, is it full steam ahead with all of these cases? What are we expecting?
If he wins both of the federal cases, either he'll self-pardon, which the U.S. Supreme Court presidential immunity case, which I totally disagree with the holding, but I think it suggests that he really could self-pardon. It would seem to me that's one of his executive functions that really can't be I just think it would go into effect. But the more likely way he'd do it is he would pick an attorney general who would say, I've looked into the case, I don't think it has merit, and dismiss it. And there's just really nothing they could do. There's a federal provision which says a judge can keep a case alive even if the prosecutor wants to get rid of it, but it just has no applicability here. If the prosecutor doesn't keep the case going, um, this is different from like the Judge Cannon thing. Even if Judge Cannon were right, which I don't think she is, down in the Southern District of Florida, the remedy would be to simply reappoint Jack Smith in some way. Jack Smith could be treated like an assistant U.S. attorney. I was an assistant U.S. attorney. It's a high rank, but I wasn't appointed by the president. I was an inferior officer. And Jack Smith could be an inferior officer like I was. An inferior officer can be appointed by the attorney general. So the remedy would be the attorney general would turn right around and appoint him. It wouldn't be like if they had let's say Harris won, so the case went on, but there was a Republican Senate. The Republican Senate couldn't monkey around with it, couldn't stop Jack Smith. It would just be handled in a different way. But as to the states, this is a very interesting situation. I've thought about it for a while. He would try to make the life of everybody involved in his New York case in state court and the Atlanta case in state court. He tried to make their life miserable as much as he could. I think Trump, he's already said he's going to be vindictive. He would try to launch tax investigations of them, try to launch all kinds of other investigations into them. As I say, try to make their lives miserable. But there's only so much of that you can do. Some people have said to me when McConnell just would not move on Merrick Garland's nomination and wouldn't move on it in 10 months. It was all too close to the election. Of course, Barrett's was never too close to the election. But Merrick Garland was way too close to the election to come up before the Senate for a confirmation hearing. And some of my friends said, couldn't Obama make their life miserable in Kentucky? I mean, couldn't he do something like, I don't know, aren't there things, LBJ would have thought of something. LBJ would have thought of some way to make Kentucky's life miserable until McConnell brought it to a vote. And I think in modern times, especially if you're a scrupulous, conscientious president, there's not much you could do. Trump would not be second time around, in my opinion, conscientious, scrupulous. He said he'd be just the opposite. So yes, he tried to make their lives really miserable until the point that they cried uncle and gave up those state prosecutions, or he got a meaningless sentence in one of them.
Before I let you go, I'd like to ask you about the would-be assassin in Florida at the golf course. And I was reading last night about Florida Governor Ron DeSantis trying to say that the gun charges that the feds are starting out with aren't good enough. So now he's directing his officials to launch their own investigation, and that might have legal consequences and not be good for what's happening on the federal level on the investigation and the charges being filed. Can you kind of make heads or tails of that for us?
I think DeSantis is just trying to play politics. Oh. And, they have this whole narrative that the FBI, is trying to undermine Trump, and it's so unfair. The same agency that went after Trump is trying to now investigate what happened with this alleged assassination attempt on Trump. And it's all nonsense. I will say it for a million times. The FBI did not go after Trump. The things that Trump did, he got himself in trouble. He brought all of his FBI investigations on himself. As they say, he got investigated by the FBI the old-fashioned way. He earned it. He earned it. And, Mar-a-Lago was just a spectacular thing that you would think nobody would think they could get away with, and the way he obstructed justice and everything else. So that's what brought the FBI on him. But DeSantis is just playing politics because all he'll do is get in the way of the feds. He doesn't have the state resources. The first time there's a big crime, somebody will say, why are spending state resources on something the FBI and the Secret Service is investigating? Why are you jumping into the middle of this? You guys have nothing to add to this. The FBI labs will test the evidence. They'll prosecute this alleged attempted assassin. And so that's all DeSantis is doing, is trying to play into that narrative. He probably figures by now Trump will lose. He's going to run the next time. He's trying to keep his MAGA contacts intact. DeSantis is, I think Harris is going to win. I said that on one of the shows as the liberal commentator against a real right winger on News Nation. But I think she may win in a romp. I think she's really relating to people. I saw your show yesterday. Your show yesterday, Kim, was wonderful, and the statement from Lawrence O'Donnell was really touching and
very powerful.
It is very powerful. People I mean, you know the story that women are bleeding out because they can't get a procedure that they could get before Roe v. Wade. George W. Bush, as he said, George W. Bush, W is not the hero of this story. George W. Bush and Trump appointed judges, and they, changed the laws in ways that doctors and nurses are now so scared to help women in these life-threatening situations that here's this poor lady in Georgia who bled out, leaving behind a 6-year-old son.
And a second one now, because we know from this Georgia panel that investigates maternal deaths, a second one died, same reason, lack of abortion care, found dead in her bed with her 3-year-old daughter clinging to her. I mean, and these are just the ones we know of. And my fear is that if the Republicans are successful in November, they'll somehow try to do away with this panel in the state of Georgia that investigates this. And so we won't hear about these cases, because we know if there are 2 cases or more in Georgia, there must be cases around the country where women are dying because of this. I don't know if there's a legal ramification or not. If women could sue the government for these deaths, if there could be some class action suit, what legal remedy could there possibly be?
Well, the first thing, women should turn out in the swing states and vote in
100%.
droves, because this was all brought to us by Trump. Trump wanted to brag that he put these 3 Supreme Court justices on there. He could have gone ahead with Merrick Garland. What an amazing way for him to start out and really be a uniter. Instead, he put Gorsuch, who's one of the worst on all of these issues. Then he put 2 more on there, and they have 6 votes. There were a lot of controversy about Chief Justice Roberts and how he steered some of these cases. And I just thought, this is kind of a nothing burger. He had 6 votes. They have 6 votes. Okay. The moderates and liberals have 3. And until people vote Harris in, and then hopefully she'll have the Senate and the House, and she can expand the size of the U.S. Supreme Court. Adam Schiff, who didn't used to be for it, probably the future senator here, almost certainly the future senator here in California, has changed from thinking that might be a bridge too far to saying, no, we have to expand the number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court to 11 or 13, or else, your generation, younger people, will have to live under this yoke of 30 years of this right-wing court. And they brought us to this situation. Had they not undone Roe v. Wade, had they not overruled Roe v. Wade in Dobbs, these situations, these deaths. So people shouldn't be naive. Oh, Trump says he's going to do this, he's going to do that. We know what Trump did. He put those 3 justices on the Supreme Court because he knew that they were going to do his bidding and overturn Roe v. Wade, and they did it. And this is the consequence, the election. The consequence is go vote, do something about it.
Agree. David Katz, thank you for being here. Always a pleasure. I enjoy our visits every week, and we'll see you next Thursday.
I don't see your comments. I hope they're not all about how can I say anything good about P. Diddy. He is someone who's he's entitled to his constitutional rights like everyone else. People have to remember that. It's not bishops and choir boys who give us the strength of our Constitution. It's these hard cases. Hard cases Absolutely. Are the ones where the courts have a chance to say, no, our Constitution really means what it says. Due process is for real. Due for everybody.
Everybody. Absolutely. Thank you, David Katz.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.